focusing on the prevention of child abuse and neglect.
Bem-vindos. Eu sou a Jen Valenzuela e eu sou da Child Trust, que é uma empresa privada e trabalha para vencer todas as formas de abuso contra crianças.
So just to quickly set up this conversation for everyone. So this is a part of the Reducing Neglect educational series. If you are new to that initiative, we'll drop in the website so you can get more information around that. And what we're going to be focusing on is the work that's coming out of health law advocates and the mental health data that they have from the services that they offer. Sorry,
Bom,
Alessandra, I'm trying to
it's
not say
okay.
too much.
Não, it's okay. Bom, então, rapidamente, nosso objetivo aqui, né, então, é reduzir a negligência, né, quanto às crianças, né, então, para vocês que são novos aqui, por favor, somente coloque, então, aqui no chat alguma informação que vocês precisem e nós trabalhamos também com pessoas que vêm como uma espécie de uma militante e nós oferecemos também serviços para a saúde mental.
So we're going to hear in a little bit from Marisol Garcia, who's the Deputy Director at Health Law Advocates, and we'll put her bio in the comments. So if you want to know more about Marisol, you can read about that. And then we're also going to hear about from Isabel Redman, who is on the data side of this project. But to get us started, we're first going to hear from Diane, who's going to tell us about her experience as a parent being a part of this program. And so she's been gracious to give us these couple of minutes and is interrupting her daily plans to do this, and then is going to jump off as soon as she's able to do that. So I'm going to pass it over to Diane as soon as the interpretation happens.
Bom, então, primeiramente, quero avisá-los, né, que nós vamos ouvir um pouco do que a Marisol, que é responsável pelo departamento, tem a nos dizer. Vocês podem ver também qual é a biografia dela aqui nos comentários. E, em seguida, nós vamos falar, na verdade, primeiramente com a da Daiane, e depois nós vamos seguir, então, que na verdade vamos agradecer a ela que graciosamente nos concedeu esse tempo para conversarmos com ela. E ela é um exemplo de algo que foi muito bem sucedido em relação dentro do programa como mãe.
Pode começar?
May I start? Sim.
Boa tarde a todos, meu nome é Daiane. Estou aqui para contar um pouco sobre a minha experiência com o programa.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana, and I'm here to tell you my experience within the program.
O meu filho, Heitor, tem quase 5 anos e eu percebi que ele tinha autismo com 1 ano, quando ele começou a não ter muito contato visual comigo, a não evoluir como as crianças de 1 ano.
My son is a hater. He's almost 5 years old. When he was around 1 year old, I noticed that he showed some signs of autism. And I noticed by looking at him, and he didn't have any eye contact with me. And I also noticed that his development was not as the same as other kids at his age.
Quando ele estava na pré-escola, ele tinha dificuldade em se comunicar com outras pessoas, porque por ser não ser uma criança não ser uma criança não verbal. E também, às vezes, ele apresentava um pouco de agressividade.
So when he was at preschool, he showed some signs, such as he had some difficulties to have a relationship, to establish a relationship with other kids, for being non-verbal, and he started to show some signs of aggression.
Mas sempre foi uma criança muito inteligente, tem um hiperfoco enorme em letras, números e em aprendizagem no geral.
However, he is a very smart kid. He has a hyper focus and he can memorize very well and identify letters and numbers.
Levei ele ao psicólogo que fez a avaliação e diagnosticou com autismo.
I took him to the psychologist and he was diagnosed with autism.
A escola do Heitor implementou algumas recomendações do psicólogo para ele, para fazer o plano estudantil de individualização.
So by the time, by recommendation, the school had implemented some of the guidelines from the psychologist. Interpreter, we need repetition just for one last part. A senhora poderia repetir somente a última parte, a implementação do que foi recomendado pelo psicólogo e...
O plano estudantil individualizado.
Obrigada.
Aí, que fala.
And that was the individualized student plan.
Inclusive serviço de fonoaudiólogo.
That would include some services of a pathologist specialist.
Ele estava fazendo um trabalho bem na escola com os serviços, mas ainda tinha dificuldade para se comunicar em casa.
Interpreter needs to correct. It was the speech therapist I was referring to. So even though we were working at home, he still had some problems to communicate.
E eu achava que não era o suficiente o que a escola estava oferecendo para ele.
And then I thought that what the school was offering was not enough for him.
Eu queria pedir um apoio para ele em casa, mas não sabia como. Ele precisava de mais ajuda e apoio para tanto falar e para fazer o básico em casa.
And I want to request for more assistance, especially at home. However, I didn't know how to do that, especially because he needed more help on his speech and basic activities at home.
O psicólogo dele pediu, principalmente para ele começar a fazer a terapia ABA.
His psychologist requested that he should take mainly therapies at ABA.
Mas o plano disse que não cobria nenhuma dessas terapias.
However, the health plan didn't cover none of those therapies.
Falei com um amigo, ele me disse para procurar uma ajuda legal.
I spoke to a friend of mine who suggested that I should look for legal advice.
E depois de muita pesquisa online, encontrei o programa
And then after doing a lengthy research online, I found the program.
Entrei em contato com eles por e-mail, explicando toda a situação que vinha acontecendo com o Heitor e com o plano, que não havia nenhum tipo de ajuda.
And I sent an email explaining everything that happened, everything that was going on with Heitor, and explained that the plan didn't cover for the therapies.
Alguns dias depois, a Tanuja entrou em contato comigo.
After a few days, he got in contact with me.
E falando que poderia me ajudar com toda essa situação.
Saying that could help me with this situation.
Expliquei todo o problema e ela veio me ajudando tanto com o plano e com a escola também.
I explained the whole problem and she helped me not only with the plan, but with school as well.
Indo comigo às reuniões para me ajudar a conseguir uma ajuda melhor para o Heitor e também me ajudando a procurar um programa que possa ele fazer as terapias necessárias para ele.
She not only went to the meetings with me at school, trying to get better help, but also looking for more appropriate therapies for Heitor.
A escola realizou uma avaliação e a gente encontrou um programa apropriado que estava disponível para o Heitor.
And then the school made an evaluation and we got to find a program that was available for Heitor.
E agora, ele é uma criança totalmente diferente, que hoje posso dizer que ele sabe me dizer o que ele quer, sabe, é o mais amoroso, ele é uma criança totalmente diferente.
Now he's a completely different child. He knows what he wants. He knows how to show me what he wants. And he is even a more loving child. He's completely different.
Mesmo com pouco tempo que ele começou desde dezembro, ele vem mostrando melhoras cada vez mais.
Even though it has been just a short period of time, but because he started in December, he's been showing improvement, huge improvements during this time.
A escola também deu um tablet para auxiliar mais a comunicação.
And the school even gave us a tablet to help with his communication.
Ele vem aprendendo mais palavras, vem aprendendo a praticar mais coisa dentro de casa, coisa que ele não fazia.
Well, he learned how to use some words. He learned how to engage in some activities at home that he couldn't do before.
Ele faz o programa por várias horas no dia. Ele sai da escola e vai direto para lá. Ela me ajudou também com o transporte para ele, para levar e deixar ele dentro do programa.
And he spent a lot of hours within the program. Even transportation was arranged so it would keep him within the program.
Ele costumava ser uma criança bem tímida na escola, então isso melhorou bastante. Agora ele está mais animado com tudo. Não recebo nenhum tipo de ligação, tanto do programa nem da escola, se ele está tendo alguma atitude diferente, só recebo coisas boas.
And he's used to be a very shy child. However, he has improved so much at school, and he seems to be way happier, more engaged. I don't hear anything negative from about him from the program or the school. It's totally the opposite, just good things.
Eu não teria conseguido isso tudo sem a Tanuja e sem os advogados que me ajudaram desde o começo. Então, eu queria agradecer muito por vocês me ouvirem e escutar a minha história, minha e do Heitor.
I would like to say how much I appreciate Tanuja's help and the attorneys that participated. Without that, he wouldn't be where he is. Thank you so much for hearing my story.
I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone. We're so moved, and thank you for telling your story.
Olha, nós todos aqui estamos todos emocionados e muito obrigada por ter compartilhado a sua história.
Nada, obrigada a vocês.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I know it's a big thing to be with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we know that you have another commitment, so thank you so much for being here.
Olha, então eu sei que isso é um grande passo. Muito obrigada pelo seu tempo e eu sei que a senhora já tem um outro compromisso.
Sim, sim. Muito obrigada. Desculpa pelo nervoso, mas muito obrigada por ter me escutado.
Well, thank you very much and I'm sorry about not saying, but I'm even a little bit nervous.
Oh, I get it. Me too.
Eu também.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, interpreter.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye bye, everyone.
So I'm so grateful to her for being able to tell her story. Thank you, everyone, for your attention to that. I'm Marisol Garcia. I'm Deputy Director of the Mental Health Advocacy Program for Kids, who is the legal group that Diana mentioned. Tanuha is the attorney out of the Lowell Family Resource Center who did the educational advocacy work on this case. There were also some things that Diana talked about with regard to um, mass health advocacy that happened, and that's another project at HLA. Andrew Cohen helped with that work as well. So I'm gonna share my screen and talk a little bit about our work. Promise I'm gonna be the shortest portion of this, and then we'll get to the data, which is way more interesting. So, as I said, I'm Marisol Garcia. I work at Health Law Advocates. Health Law Advocates is a nonprofit law firm that ensures access to healthcare for residents of the Commonwealth in general, which is why we have attorneys who have specialties in both public and private insurance, access to healthcare for immigrants, access for gender affirming care. We have a program around medical debt, a program around mental health parity. And the largest initiative of Health Advocates is the Mental Health Advocacy Program for Kids. Our mission is for kids to be healthier and happier and to be more successful in school. And we focus on kids with unmet mental health needs. We provide free legal services to families who are income eligible. That means 300% of the federal poverty level. And we advocate for access to mental health services to keep kids out of detention and foster care. We're based out of the Department of Children and Family Resource Centers, and since 2017, next year is our 10-year anniversary, we have served thousands of families in the Commonwealth. We're a statewide program. We're based out of the Department of Children Family Resource Centers. These FRCs were created by the legislature in Chapter 240 of the Acts of 2012, and their mission is like ours, to keep kids out of the court system to health and social services. When the legislature created the Family Resource Centers, they delineated the staff. So every FRC has the same staffing model, which is a director, a clinician, family partner, family support worker, school liaison. And while our attorneys have physical offices in 15 of the FRCs, we work in all of the FRCs. These are actual pictures of the attorneys, so some people get a kick out of this one. This is the Everett Family Resource Center. This is the senior supervising attorney, David Satin. All of the Family Resource Centers provide support groups and parenting classes. Those evidence-based programs might be like parenting classes for dads, support groups for grandparents who are parenting. They make referrals to mental health services. They help with a lot of basic needs. They give out hundreds of bags of food every single week, as well as having diaper drives and other basic needs. But they're really terrific places in the community. They provide everything free of charge without asking about income information or immigration status. I really many times have said it's one of the best things that government is doing. Our attorneys work alongside the Family Resource Centers. So we do cases like the one that was described to you today. And I'll talk a little bit more about the legal work in our next slide, but we also do legal consults in real time, which is Family Resource Center staff might pop into the office of the attorney and ask a question about what form they might need to apply for DMH services, or they might have a parent who's participating in a group who will raise a situation that the Family Resource Center staff was like, you know what, I have a further question about this. Do you have time today to talk to the family that's been here for, the play group? We also do statewide trainings and create materials for families on, and on all sorts of topics. Most recently, obviously, we've been focusing on the federal changes with regard to immigration and Medicaid. So folks have been asking for a lot of training on that, but we do statewide trainings every month on a wide variety of legal topics relating to the juvenile court. And so those happen statewide for the FRC staff. They're recorded, there's a library for them. And then we also do trainings for the families. Last fall, we did a training on child requiring assistance petitions that we were able to do in real time in 4 different languages. So we did it in English and Spanish and Haitian Creole and Portuguese, so the parents could participate and just opt into the, group that they wanted to hear it and the language that they preferred. We have a statewide intake line that fields hundreds of calls. Last year, we had more calls than ever. It just shows that the continued demand for the service. And sometimes there might be things that don't necessarily fall within our purview, but we're able to refer to other services. The legal work that we do, oftentimes we do a lot of special education advocacy, which is, what Diana was talking about earlier. When kids begin to struggle, the first place that they often struggle is in school. They might be too anxious or too depressed to go to school. They might go to school and struggle to pay attention. If they have significant trauma or significant mental health needs, they might get into an altercation at school. They might have an issue with another student. And in worst case scenario, they could end up being excluded from school or even in juvenile court as a result of a delinquency matter. So we do a lot of special education advocacy to make sure that kids have individualized education plans, that they have the right support services in their classroom. Maybe they even need a different school. Sometimes the families that we meet don't know the Department of Mental Health or the Department of Developmental Services exists, or that they might be eligible. So, or they might have applied and not know the status of that application. And so if families need to appeal those decisions or to have a more robust application filed on their behalf, we do that type of advocacy. Today, our client speaker also talked about not having access to health insurance and health insurance coverage that she needed for services that were in her home. And so we also obviously advocate to make sure that families have, significant, the appropriate health insurance and health insurance coverage that they need, because families that we work with, they cannot have gaps in insurance. They cannot miss appointments with their prescribers. Their kiddos cannot miss their medications. So we're always advocating for diversion from juvenile justice and child welfare. And often we're also advocating in the healthcare space, children who are boarding in the emergency department or what have you. So that's a sampling of the legal work. Isabel Redman, our representative from Boston University School of Public Health, is going to go into a much more robust explanation of our data, but to just kind of set the stage. Boston University School of Public Health has been collecting, analyzing, and reporting data for over 10 years. This is a luxury that many programs do not have, and we are incredibly grateful for it. We're going to forward you all of the reports that they've done. It's hundreds of pages, so I'm going to give you the headlines, but Isabel Redman's going to give you a much better overview. Essentially, what we know and have been able to replicate for over a decade is that kids are healthier. Their caregivers are healthier, both physically and mentally. We see reduced need for inpatient psychiatric hospitalization of children, fewer kids in the emergency rooms, fewer kids encountering mobile crisis, less kids in detention and foster care, and more kids at home in their school and their community. We're really grateful to have Isabel Redman here with us today. So I'm going to stop sharing because she's going to go in significant more depth about the work, but I'm really grateful to have her here, and thank you so much, Isabel.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. Let me just share my own slides here. All right, and are you seeing the slides? Yep, perfect.
Yes.
And not the presenter view, just the slides. Perfect. Great. Thank you for the introduction, Mari. I'm Isabel Redman. I work at Boston University School of Public Health, and I'm on the evaluation team led by Dr. Patricia Elliott. and we also work with Dr. Michelle Stransky, who's based out of Boston Medical Center. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our work, just set the stage, then family experiences before working with MAP for Kids, the changes that they experience after working with MAP for Kids, and also a little bit about the relationship between MAP for Kids and the Family Resource Centers. So first, just to set the stage about where our data comes from, you can see here the evaluation and life cycle of a MAP case. So, a family will reach out, be referred or through the intake line to connect to the program and determine their eligibility. Then we collect baseline data. So we ask the families questions before they enter the program. Then they're matched to the staff attorney based on the designated location of the FRC that the staff attorney is assigned to. Then throughout the program and their participation in the program, there's some data collection throughout. And once the case is closed, the case goals have been reached, we then collect follow-up data to compare pre and post about their experiences before the program and their experiences after the program. And then also I'll just add what's not really shown here is we do some one-off surveys just to dig deeper into some questions that we have about specific experiences from the family's perspective. So talking a little bit about the kids in MAP for Kids and what we've learned. So what you can see here, we've been evaluating, as Mari said, for 10 years. At the very beginning, it was the JMAP pilot when it was still based in the courts before they'd moved to the FRCs. And the really significant thing here that I want to highlight is that the average age of kids in MAP for Kids has been decreasing. And we see this as a positive sign that MAP for Kids is able to intervene earlier in a kid's trajectory. And then something else that I'd also like to highlight about the kids and families. From a public health perspective about this data, of course, we're evaluating the program, but because a lot of the data is reported straight from the families, we get a really interesting perspective from families that are directly interacting with mental health education state systems and how they're experiencing them. And you can see that here as well. The kids in MAP for Kids tend to have high mental health acuity. There's a variation of different disorders that they've been diagnosed with or learning disabilities. And also what you don't see in this chart as well is that a lot of the kids have comorbid diagnoses. So they're not just diagnosed with ADHD, they might also be experiencing anxiety or clinical anxiety. Something else that we've seen as well is that there's many referral pathways for a family to be connected to MAP for Kids. And this is seen as very positive because in public health, we have this idea that there's no wrong door. There's no wrong door for a family or a person to reach and get access to a intervention. And so here we can see that people find MAP through lots of different ways. Earlier, we heard about someone who, went online and did their own search, but they may be referred from healthcare organizations, referred from the family resource centers themselves, or they might have heard about the program word of mouth from someone else who also received services from MAP for Kids. And here we're looking at MAP enrollment over time. So the orange line is cumulatively all of the kids who have ever been enrolled in the program, and the blue line is every quarter, so who's been enrolled per that quarter. And what we can see is that over time and per quarter, enrollment's been going up. The program has been expanding. And the only dip that we really notice is in 2020 in the blue line, which was the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of courts and systems and schools all had to shut down, as I'm sure we all remember. And so that really slowed progression on cases and meant that there couldn't be as many new enrollees. But that was really just one blip in time. For the most part, we just see an increase in enrollment. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about what it's like for families who have youth with unmet mental health needs. So we'll go through this like thinking about a few different scenarios. So first, let's think about if a 9-year-old kid who is getting sent home from school frequently for behavioral or emotional issues. Now, what are some possible situations that families have gone through or experienced before reaching the program? Option A is referring the family for youth mental health services. B, they may require the parent to pick the child up many times. And C, talking to the parent about testing for the child. If we look at option A, the parent being referred to services, 94.3% of families in MAP for Kids reported experiencing at least one barrier to accessing mental health services before even engaging with the program. And these barriers can include bureaucratic delays, incomplete information, time, cost. We also see a fear, dislike, or distrust of professionals, which can be concerning because often that can stem from a previous negative experience. And also we see an anticipation of out-of-home placement or a loss of parental rights. And something that is concerning about this 24 and 20% here is that that's actually an increase from previous reports that we've done. So for anticipation of losing parental rights, at baseline, that used to be 17%. And in our most recent report, before engaging with the program, we've seen that at 24%. And for anticipation of loss of parental rights, that's gone from 15% to 20%. So before coming into the program, we're seeing more and more families anticipating out-of-home placement or loss of parental rights as a barrier to care. And then also, we know that children can have already interacted with outpatient mental health services, and they still go into crisis and still need MAP for Kids services. So before enrolling in MAP for Kids, 78.5% already had a mental health provider. Many already had a pediatrician focused on mental health, and over a third also attended or used some sort of mental health center or clinic in the community. And then also, in top of the kids struggling, we also see that parents are struggling as well. So this isn't a diagnostic survey, it's a screening tool, but it's a validated tool that we use in our survey. And we see that 66% of the MAP for Kids parents and guardians report symptoms that are consistent with depression. And compared to what we would expect to see in community data of only 19%, this is much higher. So we're seeing a much higher rate of parents screening positively for depression at baseline. So solution A, we were talking about parents being referred to services, but also some parents end up being referred to court. So out of a group of over 1,000 cases, 239 families were advised by a professional to file a child requiring assistance case. 39% of those advising were from the school, and 29% were a clinician. And if we look at those 93 families that were advised by the school, about a third of those actually filed, and then on top of that third, there were even more families where the school just filed the CRA, at least 103 families where the school filed the CRA. Now, in addition to the child requiring assistance case, in 2022, we decided to add a question where we ask families about 51A reports. So out of the 634 families that were asked about 51A reports, 274 families reported that someone had filed or threatened to file a 51A report to DCF, which is a 43% of them. And of those that filed or threatened to file, 56% were the school. And then also something to note is that of those who threatened to file a 51A, parents also reported that most of them actually did file. So here you can see of all the different categories or professionals or folks that may have threatened to file it, the blue is who actually filed, and the orange is did not file, and the entire bar is whoever threatened. Okay, so now let's go to solution B, possibility B, which is that the parent has to regularly pick the child up. And there's a few issues here, which is that parents may lose their job or quit their job and result in more financial challenges, maybe even loss of housing. the student loses out on learning and falls behind, which can result in even more stress and anxiety for the child when it comes time to trying to catch back up or return to school. And they can also face some stress from their peers and stigma from peers. And then also pickups are not documented as suspensions. So especially for kids that have IEPs and are supposed to um, have important special education rights triggered if they're suspended over after 10 plus removals, if it's documented as a pickup and not, if it's a pickup and not documented properly as a suspension, they may lose out on the proper due process. And in terms of the financial point, in our MAP for Kids families, 59% of families reported that they lost income due to their child's mental health issues. And then in terms of school exclusion, about 30% of youth in these MAP for Kids families have been suspended at least once, and about 30% of parents have been called to pick up their child due to mental or behavioral health problems at least once. So here we decided to do a survey on a small subsamples to dig a little bit deeper. And in our subsample of our MAP for Kids families, 53% of the kids were excluded in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, or needing to be picked up from school. In those, 30% involved law enforcement, whether that's school resource officers or community police, and then 11 were criminally charged after their exclusion from schools. And of those kids that were excluded, 44% had accommodations or special services, being an IEP or a 504 as examples. So another issue with the parent regularly picking the child up is that oftentimes there's already significant stress in the home, and it's not necessarily going to be a stabilizing environment for a kid that is struggling with their emotional or mental health at school. So here we have a normal distribution. So if we were to take the sample averages from enough samples in the population, we'd expect it to be normally distributed, and about 50% would be doing better than the average, this line in the middle being average, 50% would be doing worse than average. And then you can see like within certain distances from the mean, as we get like further away from the middle, there should be like less and less people there. And then just to really visualize it, we have this nice graphic where you can see the side where the grass is greener, they're doing better than average, and then the rocky, more desolate side where if you land there, you're doing worse than the average in the population. Now, when we think about MAP for Kids and where they've scored in our surveys, they're really falling on this worse than average side at baseline. So we really zoom in here to where 84% of the community is on the left. This is where our MAP for Kids sample is scoring on average for parent stress, depression, youth conduct disorder, and hyperactivity. And then if we look for even 97% of the community, they're doing worse than 97% on emotional and peer problems and youth total difficulties. And then looking at 99%, we have family conflict. So our average for family conflict for these folks at baseline is worse than what we'd expect to see in 99% of the community, which really highlights that it's difficult to bring the child home and present that as a solution to school behavior. So solution C, the parent asks for testing for the child. However, kids can be receiving school-based mental health services and still be in crisis. What we saw from our MAP families is that over half had individual psychological counseling or therapy in school. Many were already in a special classroom for learning behavioral or emotional needs, and 22.5% before engaging with the program were already in a special school for youth with emotional or behavioral needs. All right, so now we'll shift gears a bit and talk about a second scenario, which is conflict at home. So let's think about a teen having significant behavioral challenges that are difficult to manage at home, maybe threatening to harm themselves or others, and really pushing to a crisis point. So 3 possible scenarios. The parent may call for mobile crisis support. The parent could bring the youth to the emergency department, or the parent calling the police for help. So option 1, the parent calls for mobile crisis support, which 42% of the families did report that they have called mobile crisis for help with their youth's mental health needs. In our small subsample, we saw that 53% of families engaged mobile crisis often had to use them multiple times. But only a small percent of those had mobile crisis come to them or experienced a short wait time. And although they agreed that they were treated with dignity and respect, they did not feel that the services were timely, and they did not feel confident following the visit in managing their child's mental health. Option B, the parent brings the child to the emergency department, which we saw 43.2% in our overall sample said that they had brought their child to the ED for mental health needs in the past. In our subsample, 45% had gone to the emergency department. And the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations recommends that children not board in the ED for any longer than 4 hours. And yet, in our subsample, we saw that 44% had waited more than 4 hours to be seen. And again, they agreed that they were treated with dignity and respect, but they did not agree that services were timely, and they did not feel confident afterwards to manage their child's mental health. And we also see often that those who do engage or go to the emergency department for their child's mental health often end up having repeat visitations. So it's not just this one instance when they go. And emergency department boarding is very costly. Adjusting some previous research to 2026 dollars, we see that pediatric psychiatric patients costs about $284 per hour. And the average length of the ED visit in our sample was about 5 days. So here we average estimate that costing over $35,000. But this is likely an underestimate because there's lots of costs that are not easily billed for or estimated. And this really hits home when we think about at least a third of those families receiving no intervention, even after going to the emergency department. So solution C is the parent calling the police for help. And in our larger sample, MAP for Kids folks, 36% considered calling the police and to help with their child's emotional behavioral issues, and 29% followed through and did call the police. In our subsample, 31% of families engaged the police, and although they agreed they were timely and treated well, they showed up on the scene faster than other services. They strongly disagreed that they had confidence to manage their child's mental health following this visit. And really what we want to highlight about this point is that police officers are not trained to give emergency mental health services like inpatient hospitalization or partial hospitalization, and they may not even be sufficiently trained to support individuals in a time of crisis. They are trained to enforce local, state, federal laws, but they're really not meant to be used as a resource for a mental health crisis. And so really, when we look at all of the data together, none of these services are giving families what they need to manage their child's mental health. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about the measurable impact of MAP for Kids. So now that we've seen a bit about families' experiences as they come into the program, we'll talk more about their experiences leaving the program. So what we see is statistically significant improvements, as Mari alluded to earlier, in youth mental health and parent and family functioning. So in terms of parental well-being, although 65.7% of parents met the threshold for depressive symptoms on baseline, far fewer did at follow-up. And this decrease was also seen in higher scores indicating major depression, which changed from 37 to 27% at follow-up. And so not only are these shifts significant from a statistical perspective, but they combine with other reductions like parental stress and family conflict, and likely have a meaningful impact on overall family functioning. And if we think back to earlier, our normal distribution and how far that family functioning and family conflict were, and how far removed they were from what we'd expect to be the mean in the broader population, this change is really impactful. And for family income, we also saw a statistically significant shift between baseline and follow-up. We also saw statistically significant changes in services. So much fewer were dependent on the emergency department or mobile crisis. And if we also think back to our family's experiences at baseline of using all these different services, this change in use of services is also very impactful. And also we saw decreases, statistically significant decreases in barriers to care, including fear of out-of-home placement and fear of loss of parental rights. So after engaging with the program, families had much less anticipation of either of these outcomes, and also did not experience as much incomplete information or bureaucratic delay. And now you might have also been noticing on a few of those slides that we had quotes. As part of our surveys, we ask families to qualitatively tell us in their own words about their experience with MAP for Kids. And this is one of the reports that you can find. I think it's publicly available now on the website, the Family Voices Report. And I find this so meaningful and impactful in that we have the numbers, we can tell you the statistical significance in those changes, but these are really in the family's own words, how they've experienced these changes and how they've experienced the services. So, here we see someone listing different aspects of the programs. The attorneys know what they're talking about. They treat you with respect. They find out information for you, and they have good relationships with other programs. Other big themes that we saw in this qualitative data is that the way that education and mental health systems operate is hidden from families. It can be very challenging to navigate, and they might not be aware of options available to them or how to access them until they've engaged with MAP for Kids. So, here, my child will be able to graduate because if I was the one who continued to advocate on my own, my child would have continued to be mistreated. Her requirements would have been unattainable, but she was able to have all the accommodations on her IEP, and everything got easier for her in and out of school, including my relationship with her, only because MAP was involved. Something else that we saw was that family dynamics changed, not just the youth's mental health. And we talked about that a little bit earlier with the numbers. But in this qualitative data, and I really do encourage everyone to read the report because it's got all of the quotations in there and there's so many examples. We see how the program has impacted the home life for these families, how it's impacted relationships between siblings, parent-child relationships. And here's really just a little snapshot of all of those quotations. And then next one. And then also one thing that we saw was that there's really high demand for the program. So one of the concerns that they did have was about wait lists and what to do after they finished with the program. And I think really what this highlights is that there is a lot of demand and need for the program throughout the state. And then also we see that families felt respected in the program. This one quote, "I felt secure. You know, when you're lost and you don't know where to go, I felt like my voice was being heard and I was safe. The school wouldn't respond to me or listen to me. MAP for Kids listened to me and helped navigate what I didn't know." And so we also see here how this mechanism of the program treating the families with dignity and respect, enabling them with the tools to find other resources or to advocate for their child, really has this long-term impact after the program, and also how the families felt about the program while they were in it. Now, finally, we'll get to system integration, and I'll tell you a little bit about the FRCs and their perspective on the program. Because, like Mari said earlier, the staff attorneys in MAP for Kids, beyond just their cases, also do a lot of work with the family resource centers that we don't capture in our normal baseline follow-up surveys. And so we really wanted to be able to dig a little bit deeper into what this relationship is looking like and what's the impact of the work that's being done in the family resource centers. And so for this survey, we got a nice range of responses from 17 different FRC locations. Many different roles at the FRCs were represented. And also we see that most folks who responded to the survey have at least 1 to 5 years of experience. So we know that the feedback is coming from experienced staff. And really what we saw was an overwhelmingly positive response. You can see 86% reported that MAP for Kids staff attorney had a positive impact on their work. 89% felt that they feel confident that they could directly interact or consult with the MAP for Kids staff attorney. And then something I'll note here is that of the 14 or 11% that didn't report that, they weren't negative responses, they were neutral or not applicable. They might not have had a reason to interact with the staff attorney in that way, but there really wasn't a negative response. And our team has talked a lot about how in implementation and evaluation science, like this is a very rare result that a program fits so well and is so well received in their organization or with their partners. We also see various legal assistance sought by FRC staff. So understanding, explaining legal rights to parents and guardians, special education law, and appropriate legal matters for MAP for Kids are the top 3. But I'd also like to note that nearly half of the staff also utilize the attorneys for general legal aid referral assistance, and about 29% request specific legal resources or templates, such as from letters. So they really provide a range of services and help support the staff in many different ways. And then, of course, just like we did with the parents, we did a qualitative portion of the survey with FRCs so we could dig a little bit more into how they're experiencing working with MAP for Kids. And what we see is that the MAP for Kids staff attorney means so much more to the FRC than just a few IRP referrals. They provide guidance for such a significant number of our cases. So we really see that impact beyond just the cases that are referred to them, but also for all of the other families that come to the FRC. And also that they're a resource for the staff as much as the clients and provide assistance to other folks working at the FRC. And they really expressed that they integrated well into the work of the overall FRC. And also here is something I highlight about this quote in particular, which is really just one of many, is the families I've referred have felt so completely supported by MAP staff. It's a great feeling when you're doing a referral and you're confident in where you're sending a family. And something about a lot of what the FRC staff are saying is it corroborates what we saw from the MAP parents who told us how they were experiencing the program. And so that really supports this sort of case, and that families are having this positive experience of the program from all sides. Now, after all of that, I just want to bring it back to this, which is a little visualization of really the number of kids at different ages that MAP for Kids has helped. Because at the end of the day, I love data. It's so fun to go through, but really it's all about the kids and making sure that we help kids access the mental health resources and education that they deserve, and are able to have good outcomes. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you all so much. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Isabel. Mari, did you have anything to continue, or do you want me to open it up now?
Let's open up for questions.
Okay. So Anne, I'll get right to you. So for those of you, as we are thinking through this initiative and really trying to figure out like what are the upstream interventions and alternative pathways that we can be thinking about so that we don't have families going into the child welfare system, the child criminal system, what is possible out there. And so we did have a comment. I'll get to June's comment in a minute. Anne, you came off mute. We want to be able to have opportunity for a conversation, discussion, and more questions. And so, Anne, I'll let you kick that off.
Yeah, so I'm wondering one of the most difficult things with kids with disabilities is getting the neuropsych so you can understand the issues. And even private insurance will not pay for neuropsych, which is over, it's like $2,500 at least. To get guardianship, you have to have a neuropsych. Can you tell me how you find resources how you get these families neuropsychs?
So I completely understand that this remains a barrier for many families. Oftentimes, when children are involved with the special education system, if the school has conducted a neuropsych, then a parent is entitled to an independent evaluation. So many times, we are able to access neuropsych evaluations for our families through the special education process. There also are times where we're able to do at least a portion of these evaluations through insurance, but you're absolutely right. It's a significant barrier for our families. And if, there's just a variety of issues with regard to that. So I just won't hedge it anymore. You're not wrong, but the special education process is the process of which we're most successful doing that.
Yeah, though I would have to say that there's sometimes where, as a parent myself of a child with disabilities, I don't know if I would 100% have trusted the school's neuropsych to fully identify the range of needs.
Right. And so what I'm saying is once the school does a neuropsych evaluation, a parent is entitled to an independent evaluation paid for by the school.
Okay.
So if you don't trust the findings of the school, the school districts are required to pay independently for that evaluation. So it's not that they would only be doing it. Okay.
Another thing is, I think it would be helpful to have a list. For example, William James College will do reduced neuropsychs. It's with a PhD student involved, and that I find has been helpful, particularly for families who have kids who suspect dyslexia, which is very hard to get resources for.
Yes, we've also, I used to teach at William James, and we are familiar with William James as well, yes.
And so I think kind of for families, like a list of places that you might be able to get reduced neuropsych could be really helpful.
Mari, how big is that? How big is that for the MHAP families, where you're seeing that that is the neuropsych testing is the component that is needed to be able to move forward? And is that
I don't have, we're really data informed here. I can't say that I have data specifically about that being the crux of the issue. I would say it is, it is the thing that families with means pay for, and the families that we serve are 300% of the poverty level or below. So I wouldn't say it's not a barrier, but when we're find that is the key legal issue, oftentimes, like I said, we will utilize the special education process either through the entitlement to an IEE or sometimes as part of a Bureau of Special Education appeal. You might ask that for as part of the settlement, like when you're pursuing litigation.
So
I can't say a number, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, I just was curious if it's if that's a big chunk of.
I find it's a really big chunk problem, particularly with kids with things like dyslexia, learning issues, not somebody that's, like cerebral palsy, something where it's very blatant, but where the school is saying there's no issue, and then to have to sue because you suspect your kid has dyslexia, it's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I think you get a lot of these comorbidities. And meanwhile, the clock is ticking and your child's not getting services.
Yeah.
The other thing is, my understanding is you do not have to pick up the child if, like legally in Massachusetts, they might call you and tell you to pick up the child, but you don't have to pick up the child legally.
I think I agree with you. The concern on the part of the parents as expressed to us is that they're certainly concerned that a 51A could be filed on them if they do not pick up the child.
I don't understand that there are risks, but if the school starts to use that as a cop-out.
We call it an unlawful exclusion, but yes.
And there's the risk that the school might then call the police and other stuff. So, and I recognize the risk, but You don't have to.
So staying on that space around access to the neuropsych testing, and June in the comments also mentioned about access to actually just even mental health services and getting to that counseling, and because it's so difficult to find that across the board. How do you work through that at MAP?
So I've often asked this question, like, we don't pretend that we deliver mental health services, and that's not the issue that we address. The issue that we address is barriers to that service. So families who are not receiving that service in school when their children are entitled to that service, or if there's a Medicaid barrier, or if there's a specialized service through the Department of Mental Health. That the family has been denied, their DMH application has been denied. So yes, there's definitely broader concerns around the mental health services that are available. But that's not the space that we operate in. We're attorneys, and the barriers that we're navigating, I don't even say that we remove them. The barriers that we're navigating for families is around eligibility and access.
So your work is about getting, if the family is at the front door of a behavioral services and it's closed on them, your work is to get that door open so that they can get into the behavioral health
Right.
work.
And we're absolutely navigating the same behavioral health system that everybody else is. I'm not pretending that we have access to special services that other people don't. It's just that even before folks get to that door of that therapeutic intervention today, the mom who was with us, Dayane, talked about specific services that she was like, my child needs these services. And people were saying, no, your child does not need those services or cannot access those services. And so that's where that's the space where we live.
Yeah, no, I was wondering that also because the resources out there are so limited.
Yeah. So I have a ton of questions. If anybody out there has questions, like raise your hand, raise your virtual hand, put something in the comments so that I see you out there. And then I'm just gonna get started. And then as more people come on, then I'll stop hogging. But lots of things like connected to this initiative. So a couple of things. So one, when you were talking, Isabel, when you were talking about the reduction in age, so you're seeing the average age is much lower these days than what it was previously, and that you feel like that's a good sign because that means that families are getting access to services earlier. I wonder, if I look at it from an alternative perspective, is it that our school systems are our children suffering more sooner? Like I know in the mental health side, the acuity is much, much higher of mental health need for children. What they are presenting with is much, much earlier now than what it had been typically before. And so is it that, and you don't necessarily have to have this answer, but kind of some thoughts for me was like, our kids are not doing well, and you're seeing them earlier because they're exhibiting the behaviors or whatever at a much younger age than what they used to typically present at.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And that's certainly possible. But I will say in this case, something that we've also observed is that like over the years, Map for Kids has managed to build relationships and partnerships with other organizations, affordable care organizations, and through those relationships, they've been getting new referrals. And say, like a healthcare provider might be able to identify a kid at a younger age or see the signs at a younger age for a kid that might need help earlier than, say, teachers might. So I think some of it is just that through the relationships that MAP has built, they're able to identify kids earlier. But there's also certainly like a possibility that maybe there's a broader trend that kids are struggling earlier and needing help earlier.
When I went through this history, I didn't go through the history, though Izzy did a little bit, which is the original age of the program was almost like 16. That was when the program was based in the juvenile court. So for the first 2 years of this program was based in the juvenile court. When we moved to the FRCs, when we moved to the family resource centers, we saw a dip in age because we moved out of the court and into the community. And then our referral sources have diversified, as Izzy was just reflecting, which is that we've started to build partnerships with Boston Children's Hospital and other Medicaid providers like Mass General Brigham is a big source for us. And so that's where we meet a lot of our preschoolers. Like Izzy's last chart showed that we've served hundreds of preschoolers in this program. Those are our preschoolers, our little guys who are getting excluded from preschool, which is just a phenomenon. It's unbelievable. But that's where, you know, those kids aren't even in school yet, but their providers might be seeing them at a well child visit and the mom is expressing that, and then we're getting those referrals. So the acuity has remained kind of the same, is that right? But it's just that our age has been younger.
Great. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So in scenario 1, when you were talking about the families when they were getting threatened that they were going to file a 51A on them, do you guys know what the outcomes were of those reports? Like, were they filed in? Were they screened out from the families, you know, reporting? And then what was the reason for filing? Like, what if your child is misbehaving? Like, how are they filing on families? I'm curious, because it's not physical abuse. They're filing on neglect, but what's the neglect?
Yeah, that's a great question. In our survey, we mostly just ask if they were threatened or filed, and was it actually filed. We do ask if a case was ever opened and if they received DCF services. And so about 35% ended up, just because I happen to have it open next to me, 35% did have a case opened up and they did receive DCF services. And those services included mostly in-home services. A few had a mentor, or a few had their child placed outside the home. So I suppose that's one outcome. But we don't really dig deep in our data currently about the specific reasons behind the 51As. I don't know if Mari maybe has some anecdotal thoughts on what the reasons behind it were.
I think that you did a great job kind of talking about like what questions we're actually asking. One of the things that I feel like I need to say in terms of like the cohort of families that we serve. So because this is a voluntary program and because we serve parents, the parents are the clients. If the parents lose custody of their children and are not able to sign releases for us or authorize legal advocacy, we cannot represent them in the program. So we have a cohort, mostly all of the parents that we serve in this program have decision-making authority because otherwise we couldn't legally represent them. So it is a very specialized group of parents, but I think to your question, Jen, the context is certainly in, like you said, the context is definitely neglect, and it's definitely with regard to, mental health treatment of kids or educational services that kids are getting.
Right. I guess I'm trying to get into the mindset of the schools, right? And wondering, like, are they filing because they're frustrated with the parents and don't feel like the parents are doing anything, and so they're filing a neglect of like their parenting duties, or are they filing in support of the parents because the parents are like, I don't know what to do. And currently, there's a lot of belief that the only way to get services is via DCF, that's where the services can be available, like in-home therapy, right? So, okay. Just in the thinking, right, is in this initiative, and we're thinking about alternative pathways, like how do we get it so that that's not the place that our educational system is looking to get families into services, right? And so what's the other way to be able to access those?
Yeah, so we just won a case at the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. The decision came out at the end of January. That was not in the 51A space, it was in the CRA space. But I will say that I know that that's not our initiative here, but I think those things really walk closely hand in hand. And so the case that we just won, yes, thank you. Child requiring assistance is those are civil petitions in the juvenile court where a child might be found to be truant, not following the rules of school, not following the rules of home, a runaway or sexually exploited youth is what those cases are. Those are not criminal cases. None of those things are criminal. Those are civil matters. But essentially, The case was a situation where the school, in lieu of providing the special education services that the parent had been requesting, filed a child requiring assistance petition. And we had a hearing, we had a multi-day hearing in this matter before the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, where the hearing officer found that the school had not met their legal duty to the child in providing special education services and chastised them for bringing the child to juvenile court. This is not an isolated incident. I mean, it is one case that we handled, but it is something that we see often. And so as folks said earlier, it's a challenging thing to put on a case before a administrative law judge in the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, but we're hoping that this case that was reported by the Bureau of Special Education Appeals puts schools on notice that the Bureau is not going to tolerate that you cannot deprive kids of a free, appropriate public education and send them to juvenile court. So I think the Boston Globe reached out this week about the case. So I don't know if they'll ultimately will write an article about it, but I think that there is a lot of interest in this case that we just won.
Big win.
Thank you. I'm real proud. We won another one too. So there was only 12 cases last year that came out on parent side, and we won 2 of them. So I'm feeling really proud of the team.
Good. Okay, they're coming still. So because such good data, right, that can help us inform as we're building this program out. So
BU has done a great job. They've done an outstanding job.
So thanks. So, all right. Another data point, Isabel, was that when that a lot of times they're saying you need to leave and you need to go back home, right? And that going back home is not necessarily the response that we want, and that's not necessarily the best outcome for the child either, because you had that family conflict is 99% worse on the rocks, right? That they're the families that you're working with have the most family conflict that you're seeing. So what's an alternative? What's an alternative thing that schools can then have when the child is out of sorts? They're not able to, they don't know what to do. They're disruptive in the classroom. They're throwing chairs or whatever, because it is disruptive, right? You've got 25 kids in your class. You need to be able to teach those. And so you're pulling Johnny out or Julie out, whomever. And so what are alternatives that you would see of when schools are doing really well at this? What are those shining star opportunities or better alternatives that we can be thinking about in this?
So I would argue that the ability to evaluate, to provide appropriate not just special education supports, but also special education settings is what is the appropriate response to that. So instead of having a pattern of sending children home, it's okay, we maybe need to do an evaluation. Maybe we need to do an extended evaluation in a different setting. Maybe we need to, put support into the classroom. There could be a one-to-one aide that could, be put into that setting so that they can anticipate triggers that might be a challenge for this young person. Maybe we have this there's so many ways to be created. The IEP, sometimes folks forget, it's supposed to be an individualized educational plan. That's the key word. So it's whatever that child needs to access a free, appropriate public education. And so we need to have those conversations within the team. I'm not here to prescribe what that exactly should look like, but there should be a meeting of the folks that have that expertise and that knowledge of the child, including clinicians and other community-based providers. And I'm here, I'll bring everyone to the table. When I mean a team meeting, I mean, the Department of Mental Health should be there, the Department of Developmental Services, if they're the provider, the community-based folks like CBHI folks, everyone needs to sit down and talk about their piece of this puzzle. And it's only by bringing all those folks together is that you can arrive at a solution that works at both in school and at home. The ultimate data, what it shows, because we're not increasing those in more intensive mental health services, when you look at the data, we're not seeing more kids in residential treatment. We're seeing less kids in residential treatment, but we're seeing that by putting those community-based services in place so that then you can have that real, appropriate community-based models, because parents want their kids home. And the schools want their kids in the least restrictive environment. And so we just need to have like a conversation, an in-depth conversation with experts at the table about what that looks like. And, that all, so I'll just leave it there. But I think there's a lot of different solutions. And it's not like, we often talk about in the team, like we're not the clinicians, but we are, amplifying the voice of the families. One of the most common comments in the qualitative survey is I was saying these things and these providers did not listen to me. So we're just amplifying the voices of the families. They have already, just like Diana said, she said today, I knew that there was something that was not okay with my child's progress, and I was raising it, and then I wasn't able to get anywhere. So luckily she found us. But we're just amplifying parent voices and bringing folks to the table.
Yeah, great. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I think, part of this work is mental health just comes up over and over and over again, both mental health of our parents, our caregivers, and mental health of our children. And so it's no surprise, this is known across our country that we don't have the services available and what's needed at the level and the volume that we currently need. So many different ways to attack that, even the pipeline for education and how do you get more people interested in this low paying work, and all of the other ways that you can do it. So, so nobody else has put their hands up or put any comments in there. So I'm going to assume that, we have hit all of the questions that are there. I want to thank you for coming in and giving us an opportunity to understand like what is happening for families and what you're learning around that. I also want to say that we have more of these coming up. So for those of you who are with us still, we have more sessions coming up later in April. And so it looks like Maggie, you just put the link in there, or Liz just put the link in there, so you can click on that. You can register. We're going to have our partners from Casey Family Programs coming in and doing just a landscape analysis for us and showing us like what are other states doing across the country around this work to reduce child welfare engagement with children and reducing the amount that mandated reporters are reporting. So please join us more on that as we're still learning and we're still thinking about what Massachusetts' response is going to be and how we want that effort to look. So Mari, thank you so much for being part of our steering committee and being part of the leadership of this massive initiative that we have going. Isabel, thank you so much for joining us and giving the data a really easy way to engage with it. It was so beautiful and impactful. So thank you. We need to pull some of those data points into our talking points. So I know we're going to be sharing those slides, and so more going out to folks so that you can have that for a future time. So thank you so much.
We're delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for your work and your attention. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy your day.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Have a good one.